My name is Richard Benwell, founder and product architect here at Squared Up. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be giving you an introduction to this feature. If you are new to Squared Up and new to this feature, hopefully this will be a good introduction for you. If you're not so familiar with Squared Up, hopefully you're aware that we are an HTML5 presentation layer for SCOM, System Center Operations Manager. We've recently released version 3 of our presentation layer, which includes this new feature, Visual Application Discovery and Analysis. If you are familiar with Microsoft System Center Operations Manager, you'll probably be aware that its focus is infrastructure monitoring. But the challenge today, and the challenge that we'll be sort of looking at with Visual Application Discovery and Analysis, is that of enterprise application monitoring. The focus really for IT organizations have moved on from just infrastructure monitoring to the challenge of monitoring your applications within the enterprise. Now, the enterprise part of application monitoring is actually the environment is quite a challenging environment. Typically, you have a huge sprawl of applications. These applications are running across infrastructure, across many different platforms. So you'll probably have some Windows, probably have some Linux in there as well, running across both sort of physical on-prem data centers and up in sort of clouds from Azure to AWS. And any one application could span any number of those different platforms and locations. Those applications are probably a mix of new applications that are actively developed. You perhaps have a DevOps team assigned to them, and also legacy applications that may have been deployed sometime in the past. You no longer know exactly how that application is architected and where it is running. And associated with that, typically even in sort of larger sophisticated environments, there's sort of little or no mapping from your infrastructure to your applications. And along with that, a constant change, a dynamic environment. So having mapped out an application in the past, perhaps when it was initially deployed and a Visio diagram was created, that application diagram is now out of date. And since then, you perhaps added in additional servers to provide capacity, or perhaps changed the architecture of the application as it's been upgraded and evolved. So that's the environment. Now, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of who has the knowledge and who needs the knowledge of how this application is working, there are multiple application stakeholders and multiple IT teams involved. So from the application stakeholders point of view, you might have your end users, of course, your service desk, your application owners, and of course IT management and business management. In terms of the IT teams, you'll have teams involved in both the underlying infrastructure, database teams, network teams, application teams themselves, and so on. And traditionally, there's a silo sort of mentality between those teams. They're focused on their individual element of that stack and not necessarily focused on the overall application. As I said before, many apps are never sort of properly mapped or modeled, so that initial knowledge of where that application is deployed perhaps was available at the time that application was deployed, but the person responsible for that has maybe sort of moved on. Maybe that documentation is now out of date. So in terms of the tooling available in an enterprise application monitoring scenario, if you're on this webinar, typically you'll be sort of familiar with SCOM and the Distributed Application Designer, and sort of many SCOM customers have sort of found that to be really unsuitable at the end of the day, both through the difficulty in designing those applications in the first place, maybe sort of slowness and complexity of the designer, and of course at the end of the day, it's the SCOM administrator using the designer and not the application engineer who understands the application. Also, you find that SCOM, focusing on SCOM as an application monitoring tool in the past has sort of provided maybe sort of less value than expected, because outside of sort of immediate SCOM alerting, typically SCOM console has been sort of unloved and SCOM data underused in your organization, and obviously that's where sort of Squared Up comes into the picture and is really kind of changing. You'll have not just SCOM though, you'll typically also have a sprawl of infrastructure monitoring tools, and this goes back to those sort of siloed mentality where your database engineers may have a database monitoring tool, your hypervisor engineers have a hypervisor monitoring tool, and so on. So each tool provides a silo view, and that means that pinpointing the cause of an application performance issue is not attempted, or is often left even sort of unresolved. The application is maybe sort of fixed, improved, but you never really get to the root cause of what the underlying issue was. So given that challenge, I'd like to introduce you today to the solution that we're sort of offering, which is Visual Application Discovery and Analysis. What is this? It's simple, fast discovery of your application topologies. You can publish those application models that you discover into SCOM, and from there use third-party connectors to push that out into your CMDB and sort of share that with the broader organization. And what that means is you can manage and troubleshoot your IT environment in the context of your applications, not just your infrastructure. So you're no longer having to deal with just infrastructure-based alerting and performance issues. You can see that in the context of how that's affecting your applications and, of course, how you're affecting your IT services overall. Visual Application Discovery and Analysis doesn't allow you just to initially model your applications. It also allows to keep your applications up to date. It's a very dynamic, very easy to use modeling tool. And it's all powered by Microsoft System Center Operations Manager. And I'll come back to that later in this demo, where we'll be looking at the advantages of using your SCOM infrastructure. So how does it work? Well, as I say, it's very lightweight, very cost effective. Squared Up itself is just a visualization layer requiring just an IIS web server that you install in your SCOM environment. It leverages your existing SCOM infrastructure, so Squared Up communicates with your SCOM management servers, which of course communicates the agents, existing agents on your application servers. We have support for cross-platform, so anything the SCOM agent can be installed on, we can support in terms of discovery, so like Windows and Linux. And of course, if you have your SCOM gateways, you can discover applications that are spanning both on-prem and cloud-based infrastructure. So that means no new infrastructure, no new agents, no costly continuous data collection. This is all on demand, so we can reach out from Squared Up, reach out all the way to an application server and discover what that application server is connected to. And that's happening whilst you're interacting with the presentation layer, rather than that data being collected 24/7 and having to be stored in a large database. And there's also no limit to the number or scale of applications you can model with Visual Application Discovery and Analysis. So let's look a bit more closely at the discovery element of VADA. Essentially what it is discovering is process level network connections between your nodes, and the diagram on the right here just gives you a flavor of that. So we can look at the TCP/IP connections between servers and understand specifically what process on each server is involved in that connection. So you can start to map out the dependencies, downstream dependencies. Here we see from IIS through to a downstream HTTP service running on an application server. Now, if you do look at TCP/IP traffic on your servers, there will be a lot of traffic that's not specific to your application. And VADA allows you to filter out non-application infrastructure noise. So you don't want to look at the connections made by the SCOM agent, for example. You just want to focus on the connections made by your applications. And that means you can map up complex applications dependencies across multiple tiers. So on the right-hand side here in the screenshot, we see just a sort of a dependency between the web and the active, but we can flow that all the way through multiple tiers. And I'll be sort of showing a live demo of this in just one second. And as I say, to keep application models up to date, you can easily rerun discovery at any time to understand how your application architecture has evolved. So having discovered an application, the next part of it is to be able to save it. We have one click to save as a SCOM distributed application. So having modeled out your application visually and interactively, you can push that straight back into SCOM and then use third-party connectors to take your SCOM DAs out into your CMDB or IT service management tools. VADA is also a very lightweight, easy to use tool, and you can put that into the hands of your actual application teams. So it doesn't necessarily need to be your SCOM administrator who's mapping out these applications. Typically the SCOM administrator doesn't necessarily understand the architecture of the applications and how they should look, and hence you can push VADA as a tool straight out to your application teams and put the application mapping process in the hands of those teams. So let's have a demo of Visual Application Discovery and Analysis in action, looking at just how we build out those applications. I'm just going to switch over to my web browser here. This is actually the screen you would get after installing Squared Up version 3.1 for the first time. So a very lightweight install, takes about sort of 5 or 10 minutes. You fire up Squared Up and you are presented with this welcome page. Now what I'm going to do is actually just start by looking at a Windows Server view here, and this is maybe a kind of good demonstration of the sort of infrastructure view that we're quite used to with SCOM. Here's a list of my Windows Server 2012 boxes in this environment. I can see some of them are red, some of them are orange, and some of them are green. But I don't really have the context of how that's affecting my IT services. Now, I've got some red servers here. Is that affecting my applications? How important is it for me to address those issues on those red servers? So what we'll do here is actually drill down into one of these servers and map out how it relates to an application. So I'm going to choose a web server to start this mapping. I'm going to choose SCOM Web01 here. I'm going to drill down into that web server. Now again, just out of the box, you'll get full drill downs within Squared Up. So SCOM has discovered this server and understands that it's an IIS web server, so Squared Up automatically gives you an IIS-centric view on this web server. We can also see detailed OS metrics. If this were hosted on a virtualization platform, we'd be able to see metrics of the hypervisor as well. What I'm going to switch over to is the application discovery perspective here, and we'll see now VADA kick into action straight away. So very little delay, sitting right alongside all of your standard monitoring data is now the ability to understand what this server is connected to. Now, this was run on demand, so as soon as I clicked on App Discovery, we kicked off a task here to understand what are the downstream dependencies of this server. So we can see the IIS worker process on this server is connected to downstream servers on port 80. Now, if we wanted to, we could look at some of the infrastructure components that we've filtered out here. So, for example, we have the Microsoft monitoring agent. If I just sort of unfilter that for a moment, we'll actually see our SCOM agent here is connecting off to the SCOM gateway and a management server and so on. Now, we wouldn't want that as part of our application diagram. It is just a SCOM agent component adding some noise from a network connection point of view. So that can be filtered out. And we're left with just the dependencies for this application. Ooh, sorry. So we discovered that this web server has two dependencies, App01 and App02. What we can start to do is actually name these groups of servers with a tier. So this is my web tier, Web01, and this is my app tier with App01 and App2. So already we're starting to get the shape of this application. Now, visual application discovery analysis is fully dynamic, fully interactive. So what I can do is continue now to run discoveries against those downstream servers, and we're reaching out to the SCOM agent, running essentially a similar task to a NetStat task on demand, and discovering what network connections those servers have. And we can see those servers actually are running IIS and have downstream dependencies on three nodes down here. Now, first of all, we can see that we have a downstream node that is not discovered as a SCOM object. It hasn't got sort of a hard corner there. This is just a unresolved endpoint. This is actually running up in a cloud service. So what I'm going to do is just drag that into a separate component group here and call that an external dependency. Oops. So I have our application servers dependent on some cloud service against a web service. We see port 80 there, and I can include that in my model. I can also see my application servers are connected to an Oracle server, so I'm just going to pull that out into a separate group here, and a SQL server. Now, typically you won't just have a single SQL server running part of your application. Again, if I discover out what the SQL server is connected to, I can see the other server in the cluster, and just very simply move that back into that SQL DB and make sure that my application map here does include both of those servers in that cluster. Obviously, one of those servers does have a problem that's relevant to my application. So just starting from the web server here, on demand, I've discovered what are the current connections of the components on these servers and modeled out several tiers here all the way down to two different databases and the external dependency. What I can see also, though, is that I have some additional upstream nodes connecting into these application servers. Now, so if you were to look at this as an application model, you'd probably say, well, I've got redundancy on the application tier, redundancy on the SQL tier. What I'd be typically expecting to see is multiple web servers here. And indeed, what I can do is just simply open up those upstream dependencies and discover that I do have 2 additional web servers in that web tier. So not just the downstream dependencies, I can also discover out the upstream dependencies. Let's just drop those into our web tier. And we're nearly finished modeling out this application. Just one more thing I'm going to do is just do the upstream mapping as well. So I can see I have an incoming connection to my web server here, and that's going to map out and find actually a NetScaler load balancer. And as you can see, because we're sitting on top of SCOM, we've managed to sit on top of all of the cross-platform support that SCOM has as well. So we can run discovery against the Oracle database that's running on a Linux box, and we should be able to see the specific Oracle processes there that are running on that Linux box. So Oracle DB test. We can also see, although we can't run discovery against that NetScaler, we have actually resolved that NetScaler to a SCOM monitored object, so that is part of our health model of our application now. So just in a very few sort of simple clicks, I have gone from looking at an infrastructure component, just one single web server, and really understood what application it's part of and kind of the context of that infrastructure. And of course related my web server to 2 other web servers and all of those downstream infrastructure components as well. That really is as simple as it looks to translate infrastructure monitoring right through into your application context. Having discovered out this application, saving it, I just click Save As here. I can save this off as just a one-off dashboard to use to monitor this application in the future. But really, I'll get many more benefits out of saving this application off as a distributed application object in SCOM. So if I just type in the name of this application here, hit download, what I actually get just in one click is a small SCOM management pack that gets exported out of VADA. That can now be imported by my SCOM administrator into SCOM, and that distributed application will exist in SCOM. And from there, I can start building dashboards out. I can start sort of exporting my DAs off into my CMDB as well. So just in those few minutes there, hopefully just sort of shown how easy it is to model out your applications using visual application discovery. I'm just going to go back to the deck now, because what I want to do is look at the benefits of modeling out my application. So we've seen how easy it is. Why is it so important to model out my applications and store those application models in SCOM? So first off, let's look at the analyze part of visual application discovery and analysis. So I'll show this in a live demo at the moment, but you can see on the right here, what I can do is take that application model and bring in all of my monitoring data in the context of all of those nodes in that application. So again, everything that's available in SCOM is available for me to use in my analysis. And what that's going to give us is end-to-end application performance monitoring. So just to be clear, just to differentiate this from a full APM tool, this is not looking at sort of, transaction level monitoring. We're not tracing transactions through this application, but we are actually looking at the performance of each one of the nodes in this application and understanding, for example, where the bottlenecks lie. So you can pinpoint application trouble spots by using your existing infrastructure monitoring. We have not, through VADA, had to add any new monitoring into SCOM. This is taking all the existing data that SCOM has been collecting across all of your servers and infrastructure in the past, and now putting that into an application context. The benefits of now having that application monitoring and having that in SCOM is that we get full stack monitoring for that application essentially for free, using our SCOM infrastructure and using our SCOM monitoring with Squared Up on top. So we now have top to bottom full stack monitoring. We can look at both the availability of that application through web application availability monitoring in SCOM, all the way through to SQL performance, down to the OS performance, down to the hypervisor performance, and even the network and the SAN performance, all by putting together the SCOM monitoring data that we already have in the context of this application within Squared Up. And we can immediately leverage the data from all of our SCOM management packs. If you're familiar with Squared Up, you'll know that you put Squared Up into a SCOM environment and all of the data flows straight through into your presentation layer. There's no additional customizations you need to make to SCOM in order to pull data out from your SCOM management packs. The other thing we get with Squared Up and applying this to our applications is finally our single pane of glass, where we can integrate data not just from SCOM but from external tools to solve application level problems. So you may have tools such as an ITSM tool, ServiceNow, System Center Service Manager, and of course they are very application service focused. You'll probably know who the escalation point for that application is, who sort of the other kind of contacts are, perhaps the number of open incidents coming in from users for that application. So we can take that application data and pull that into the data alongside SCOM to resolve those application level problems. Extending that further, you can pull in data from a log analytics tool like OMS, again taking very much infrastructure level log analytics data and putting that into the context of your applications to solve application problems. And there are many other more tools that you can integrate with using our web API and SQL connectors. Lastly, the one other element I wanted just to sort of highlight once you've built your application models is, of course, availability monitoring. So it's not just about taking your infrastructure data and sort of understanding how that relates to your applications and your services. At the end of the day, your users, your service desk, and your business are interested in the availability of those applications. Now we can use SCOM there to add availability monitors, and that can provide us with uptime and performance dashboards. The benefit being that when we drill down into our sales app here that's showing as a low SLA, we get that full application context that we've modeled with VADA. So it's not just about just monitoring the availability of the application, it's being able to then tie that to the health of your infrastructure. With any of these dashboards, especially with the SLA dashboards, you can publish those to wall monitors, SharePoint pages, and beyond, all with our open access feature that can take any dashboard and push that out to non-SCOM users. So you don't have to be a SCOM user in order to access any one of these dashboards. So having modeled out our applications, you can see all those benefits now to finally tying together all of the data we have, being able to sort of publish that out to users and really breaking down those silos between the teams who are supporting applications. So what I want to do is just go back to our demo and we'll take a look at that in action. So we left our demo having exported the sales app into a SCOM management pack. I've actually imported that before this demo. So what I'm going to do here is just search for that application and drill down into it. So this could be a drill down from one of those SLA dashboards, perhaps a high level sort of wall monitor dashboard. And what I've done is built some additional dashboards on top of my SCOM distributed application, so the SCOM DA that we're looking at, but I built out a number of different perspectives for this application using Squared Up. And actually the main perspective I have here, my sort of main landing point for this application, is not infrastructure health but the availability. So I've really wanted to focus on that as my landing point. We actually have a live preview of the application on the right hand side there. So this is the sales application running live, embedded in an iframe. We can see the response time of the application and the load, and you can see here we had a peak 2 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, where we have a sort of both a peak in the load and the response time, and we can see the current availability and the availability of our SLAs. And of course these are terrible SLAs. This is a demo app that's permanently showing red. Hopefully your SLAs will be just slightly higher than the ones we have in our demo lab, but you can sort of see the point here, which is the focus on the availability of this application, both sort of historically and current. And we switch over to topology, we'll see that saved topology diagram that we modeled earlier. So you have instant access to this. It's no longer now a static diagram. We've added in our rich infrastructure monitoring data into this diagram. So we can see that our web monitor at the end here is showing red, some sort of unavailability issue. We do have an issue with our load balancer, so we might need to drill down into that and investigate. However, our web tier and our app tier are looking healthy, and the load balancing does look to be operating correctly, and we have a number of issues on the database tier here, and I'll come back to that in a second. So we're not just using visual application discovery and analysis just for the discovery part, we can now reuse those models and those diagrams to see the actual health and performance of the application. We can build any dashboards we want, any kind of custom dashboards we want on top of this application, having modeled it. So keeping an eye on low disk space, importing actually kind of custom Visio diagrams for that as well, seeing the health of our net scaler and so on. So you can build out very kind of custom dashboards on top of these application models that you've created using VADA, making sense for these individual applications. Just moving on to that sort of single pane of glass, we can now offer those in one click, even though I'm within essentially a SCOM environment, so Square Lab sitting on top of a SCOM environment. Just in one click here, I've pulled in the relevant information for this application from Service Manager. And this could be Service Manager or ServiceNow or indeed another ITSM tool that you can integrate with via SQL or a web API. And in one click, we see both the service properties, so the asset properties, the owner of this service, the priority of the service, and any other notes that we need. We can see our escalation points, and we can also have visibility of the open incidents that are coming in from our service desk. So if we are an application engineer, we now understand what our users are really seeing and understanding about this application. And even if we are a database administrator who's responsible for the database of this application, we have visibility of how it's affecting our users. So real end-to-end visibility in a single pane of glass for us to use. In addition, if you are looking at Operations Management Suite log analytics, here's an example of how you can really translate that sea of data that OMS collects for you back into value for your engineers who are supporting your applications. In one click there, I've asked OMS what are the changes to any infrastructure component across this application. And you can see here I've had updates to the SQL Server agent, and I've had some security updates being rolled out as well. So if you do have a performance issue, we can see here that on the topology diagram we had an issue with our SQL servers. With one click, we can instantly see what changes have been applied to those servers over the last 24 hours, say. We can also see service changes and if anyone's been RDPing onto those servers and sort of interacting with those servers manually. So taking all that data that might be available to you in log analytics or ITSM tools and putting that directly in relevant to your application monitoring and support. Just one last example to finish off with, just showing that although we're working here in the context of an application now, all of our SCOM data from external tools, all in one place in the context of an app, we still do have sort of full drill downs as well. So if I want to drill down into that SQL Server, if I am the DBA, that's no problem. I'm now in the depths of that SQL management pack data. I can see all those SQL data points that I need. I still have access to all of the other management pack data for this box as well. So we can very, very quickly go from application monitoring straight down into troubleshooting a specific piece of infrastructure. So that wraps up the demos I had. If you are already familiar with Squared Up or Visual Application Discovery and Analysis, just to kind of recap what we've recently introduced for 3.1, we've released over the last few weeks. First off, support for Linux discovery, so essentially leveraging the SCOM agent on Linux to run network level discoveries as well. We have added in support for modeling your different infrastructure within tiers or component groups, if you're familiar with the SCOM DA terminology. So that's allowing us to now really kind of logically group our infrastructure together, and essentially is giving us the ability to fully create a SCOM DA without the need for a SCOM for the SCOM DA designer. Very recently, we've added in support for Windows Network Load Balancer. Obviously does add sort of some ambiguity into your connections. You obviously have an outgoing connection that could be load balanced across many different servers. VADA will now sort of handle that gracefully and allow you to incorporate that into your diagram as well. You don't have to rely on just the on-demand discovery of what components are talking to what. You can now also manually add in known dependencies. So for example, if you have a backup job, some sort of batch job that runs overnight, and maybe sort of takes some data and requires a backup to some external server, That's not captured when you're running VADA. That's no problem. You can add in that dependency manually to sort of fill out your diagram with known dependencies. We have also, and will continue to work on both sort of the performance and scalability of VADA to come and make sure you can model the very largest applications and most complex applications out there. All right, so thanks very much for taking the time to join me on this introduction to visual application discovery and analysis. What I would recommend you do is see it for yourself. Very simply, just go to squareup.com on the home page there, or go to free trial, and you can download a 30-day free trial that is fully unlimited, unlimited users, unlimited features for you to try out in your own environment and see VADA in action against your own applications. If you are an existing customer on any one of our licenses and you're interested in learning a bit more about VADA, please do drop us a line at hello@squareup.com, and we'll kind of take you through the possibilities of upgrading or trying that feature out in your own environment as well. Lastly, I'll just leave you with some additional resources. We have a great sort of little video that you can view and sort of share with your colleagues on our blog. We also have a blog that kind of looks at VADA in depth and really kind of covers a lot of the content of this webinar about how VADA works and what the benefits are. We have a much longer Masterclass webinar available. Again, it goes into much more detail about exactly what's happening through discovery and how it's being saved out into a distributed application. That's available on YouTube. And if all of those links look a little bit too long and hard to remember, then this webinar and this slide deck will be made available shortly, and so you can kind of review the content and follow those links in your own time. So with that, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've found this informative, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.